Syraen was no chosen one, no voice, just a girl in her tribe. Her hands were made for work, not weapons. Her world was small, her family, her tribe, and the endless sea of sand that stretched beneath Cylon Prime's pale sky. But everything changed that night. The attack came like a storm without warning. Beneath the pale glow of the moons, they fell upon the camp, a rival tribe, feared as legends for their savagery. Their raiders cut through tents like predators through flesh. Fires devoured the sky, and screams filled the air as silhouettes of murderers and slaves took form in the darkness. Syraen saw it all. She watched as their voice fell, cut down like paper. She heard her mother's desperate cries as she was dragged away, and the hollow, final sound of her father's body hitting the ground. She wanted to run, but her legs refused to move. Terror held her in place.
"Run, Syraen, run!"
With tears stinging her eyes and soot streaking her skin, she fled, bloody, shaking, away from the destruction. She ran until the sand itself felt like knives against her feet. When she thought her legs would give out, she saw it. An Astari Construct, rising from the sand like a relic from a forgotten world. Its walls were carved from ancient stone, etched with patterns that glowed faintly under the moonlight. As she approached, the doors opened, not with force, but as though they had been waiting for her, sensing her desperation. She stumbled inside, and the doors sealed shut behind her with a click. The trap was sprung. Darkness filled the chamber. The air was still and heavy, until a faint hiss began to sound from the walls. Gas began to seep through unseen cracks, glowing, turquoise, like Cronux itself had begun to bleed into the room. It was beautiful, and it was deadly. She turned to the doors, slamming her fists against the stone until her knuckles bled.
"Let me out, please!"
But no one heard. No one came. The glowing mist swirled around her, creeping into her lungs. Her screams turned to ragged coughing until even that was swallowed by the suffocating silence. She collapsed to her knees. The room around her fractured. She saw visions, not dreams, but lives. Her life played out in endless circles. She saw herself as a child, small and helpless. She saw herself older, hunched by age and loneliness, laughing madly until her body crumbled into dust. She saw herself torn apart, bit by time itself, dissolving into nothingness, mere fragments. But she also saw herself as something else, a predator, a conqueror, a storm given form. It was her, yet it was not her. Voices filled the air, layered and unrelenting.
"We are you. You are us. Rise, Syraen. Become more."
Pain erupted through her body, burning her alive from the inside. She screamed as Cronux consumed her, breaking her apart and remaking her again. She felt herself die, over and over, but she never truly died. The doors opened. Outside, the raiders waited, their swords wet with blood, their laughter thick with arrogance. They saw her standing in the doorway, alone, motionless, her silhouette cast in the shadows of the turquoise light spilling from within. They saw her, but they did not recognize her. She had changed. Her skin was no longer human, but a flawless shield of living stone, glowing faintly turquoise, pulsing with the rhythm of something primal. Her hair, once tangled and dark, flowed behind her like a river of liquid light, restless and alive, whispering softly as though it carried its own will. Her eyes, now pure white and blinding, fixed on her enemies. There were no irises, nothing human left, only a depth that saw their end before it had begun. The first man stepped forward, sword raised.
Take her!
Syraen moved. She dropped to all fours, her body coiled like a predator ready to strike. The first blade came for her, but she ducked under it effortlessly, as though time itself had slowed. Before the attacker could react, she was upon him. Her fingers clawed into his face, ripping his eyes from their sockets. He fell screaming. Another rushed her, but he barely saw her coming. Syraen vanished from his sight, only to reappear behind him. She grabbed his spine with inhuman strength and broke him in half. The others began to back away, their earlier bravado replaced by panic. But she didn't stop. She tore into them, ripping, biting, clawing, her fingers shredded flesh, her teeth crushed bones. The sand turned red beneath her, soaked in their blood. By the time it was over, they were nothing but ruined bodies, scattered across the sands. Syraen stood in the center, blood dripping from her hands, her breath steady. Her hair still moved, floating like a crown of light around her, indifferent to the carnage. When the dawn broke and her tribe found her, she stood alone in a sea of the dead. The rising sun caught the light in her turquoise skin, her eyes, still glowing faintly, fixed on the horizon. No words passed between her and the tribe, only silence, heavy with awe and terror. She was no longer the girl they had known. She was something else, something greater, something terrible. The whispers began as they carried her home. She is chosen. She is the voice. She is Syraen. And Syraen said nothing. Her gaze remained fixed on the desert, where a new future awaited, one she would carve herself.